Didn't Mike build all of his mass from conventional, high-volume methods? Well, the short answer is no, he did not. If you examine his training history chronologically, a pattern of what style of training produced his best gains emerges. From age 12 to 15, Mike actually gained 70 pounds, training only 3 days a week, with whole-body workouts consisting of 1 to 3 sets per body part. According to Mike, quote, "From the time I started bodybuilding at the age of 12 until I was 15, I had actually trained in a relatively sensible and productive manner. Just how sensible and productive I was not to discover for a number of years. Along with the first set of weights that my dad had bought me came an instruction booklet that suggested beginners like myself work out no more than 3 days a week, performing 3 sets for each body part. That formula proved so successful that in those 3 years, I went from an initial body weight of 95 pounds with 9-inch arms to a weight of 165 pounds and 15.5-inch arms. Not bad for a 15-year-old kid." Close quote. But then his training changed. Quote, "It was at this time that I began to head down the wrong training path, though I didn't know it at the time, and to make mistakes I was to pay for later. My first big error, and it was a whopper, was deciding to forsake my little training book and begin to train like I'd heard all the top bodybuilders trained. After all, it made sense. Those guys were my heroes. I saw their pictures in the muscle magazines. I read the articles. They said every single title winner was training 6 days a week, at least 2 hours a day. Who was I to question? As a teenager with no real responsibilities and a great deal of energy, such a training program seemed perfectly logical and not at all demanding. I quickly became a gym rat. I'm not afraid to admit that I liked it. In some ways, bodybuilders are like pool players who only feel really comfortable under the soft glow of the green-shaded lights in the pool room with their pals around them. The gym is like that. It's a home with the big family. The sounds, the sweat, the joking, the lavish approval and encouragement of workout buddies make a comfortable milieu that nurtures the weight trainer, constantly reassuring him of his strength, vigor, health, and beauty. I was so caught up in the scene that I hardly noticed that my muscular gains had slowed down considerably. I certainly didn't connect it with my marathon training methods. But I was told that was the way it was, that it was natural, supposed to happen. I believed, but somehow it didn't seem right to me. And that was the first time I consciously remember thinking that just because a guy has a 20-inch arm doesn't necessarily mean he knows what he's talking about." Close quote. For the next 4 years, when he was aged 15 to 19, Mike trained several days a week with high volume, training up to 3 hours a day and working up to 30 sets per body part 6 days a week. It was also at 19 that he began using anabolic steroids. During this period, he gained another 20 pounds, eventually tipping the scales at 185 pounds. It was then that he began his competitive career, at the age of 19, winning his first contest, Mr. Lancaster County. Several months later that same year, he won Mr. Pennsylvania. It was also in 1971 that Mike entered the Mr. America contest, but placed a distant 10th to Casey Viator, a young man who employed high-intensity training. Seeing what results intense, brief, and infrequent training had on Casey's physique, Mike decided to give it a try after he was honorably discharged from the United States Air Force in 1974. He worked out in a high-intensity fashion, whole-body workouts performed 3 days a week, 2 to 5 sets per muscle group. During this period, from 1974 to 1976, his body weight muscle mass increased steadily, and it ended with his winning a national contest, the Mr. America. So, in 1974, in the Junior Mr. America, he weighed 190 pounds. In 1975, at the Mr. America, he weighed 196 pounds. In the 1976 Mr. America, he weighed 209 pounds. These gains were made on an already advanced level physique. Mike continued to use the 3-day-per-week whole-body protocol up until 1977, at which point he switched to a split routine, cutting the whole-body workout in half, essentially, training Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. But soon he felt he wasn't recovered enough and backed his training frequency off to once every 2 to 3 days, still on a split routine. He did this up to and including his training for the 1980 Mr. Olympia contest. Once again, his high-intensity training approach resulted in impressive muscle gains. In 1978, he won the Mr. Universe weighing 215 pounds. In 1979, he came second in the Mr. Olympia, weighing 210 pounds. In 1980, he placed fifth at the Mr. Olympia, weighing 220 pounds. So, from 1977 to 1980, he gained 11 pounds of muscle. In looking at the chronology of his training career, we witnessed the following. From 1963 to 1966, he trained 3 days per week, 3 sets per muscle group, training his whole body, and gained 70 pounds. From 1967 to 1971, he was training 6 days per week and up to 30 sets per muscle group on a split routine. He ended up gaining 20 pounds. From 1974 to 1980, he used high-intensity training 3 to 4 days per week, 2 to 6 sets per muscle group on a split routine, and gained 30 pounds. So, in reviewing the above data, one can clearly see that Mike spent the bulk of his training career, 13 out of 18 years in fact, training in a non-conventional or high-intensity fashion. By no means did he build the majority of his muscle size with conventional or volume training, which, in reality, represented only a brief interlude in the middle of his training career and also represented his lowest rate of muscle gain. Some have said that Mike never trained the way he later recommended his clients train during the 1990s, but then he never claimed that he did. Mike didn't arrive at his final views on how best to train until the period of time when he was training regular, that is, non-steroid using, clients. That's when he discovered that their recovery ability was far beneath his own, particularly when he was competing and using steroids. In fact, Mike stated that while he had been the arch advocate of lesser training during his competitive days, he was still overtraining.
If I had made one major mistake years ago while training for competition, it was that despite having been the arch advocate of lesser training, I was still overtraining, i.e., training too long and too frequently. While Arthur Jones contributed enormously to our knowledge with his general theory that exercise must be intense, brief, and infrequent, it is apparent to me now that he wasn't clear on practical application. He had issued what, in essence, was intended as a surefire prescription for everyone at all times: train the entire body 3 times a week. What I have come to understand much better over the last 2 years as a result of training and keeping records on over 200 individuals is just how demanding high-intensity training really is. I have come to understand that when an individual is training properly, i.e., training intensely enough to stimulate growth, and is neither training too long nor too frequently to prevent growth, that he should be witnessing progress, if not every single workout, then at least on a very regular basis. Now, here comes the difficult part for most people. The general theory advanced by Jones over 20 years ago, train hard, train brief, and infrequent, was valid. There is a wide range of variation among individuals I'm seeing with regards to recovery ability and ability to tolerate intense exercise. What the individual has to work with is the application. Everybody needs intense contractions to stimulate growth. What the individual has to work with is just how much volume and frequency he can tolerate.